Are you a fan of pro wrestling, comedy, and combat sports? Then we have the podcast for you because we cover that and much, much more.
Do you like to debate with your friends? Do we have the perfect segment for you? It's the 531, where we take any given subject, break it down to a top 5. From there, we debate it down to 3, and then into that number 1 spot.
If you want to get a hold of us, find us on our social medias. Search Working Fans Podcast on any major social media platform. And if you want to find the podcast, search for us on any major podcast platform, as well as YouTube.
Working Fans Podcast. We put in the work so you don't have to.
Fans, welcome back for another edition of the Working Fans Podcast, the big year-end edition. We're recording this a little ahead of time, but this will be our last episode of the year. And we are joined by @WWE Creative _ish on Twitter. It's the longest-running parody action-adventure programming parody account on Twitter, patreon.com/WrestleRoast, and prowrestlingtees.com/creative_ish. We are joined by the great Robert Carpolis. Robert, how are you doing today?
That's the best intro I think I've ever gotten on a podcast, so that was awesome.
I really try and go in on these intros, and with Mike Lawrence, I was a fan of his comedy before going in. So when I fucked up his Twitter, I was like, Jesus Christ, I thought I covered all these bases, because we're happy when anyone wants to join us, especially other people that do these podcasts. So it's nice to be
fair. To be fair, Mike did have a Twitter, and I didn't realize that it vanished because I followed him. I was a fan of Mike's long before I had him on my show as a guest years ago, and then we brought him into Wrestle Roast. So I thought he was on Twitter for a while, and we were talking about Twitter, and he was like, I can't do a good Mike impression. He was like, yeah, I deleted my Twitter. And I was like, oh. He's like, you didn't notice? I'm like, no. So,
you weren't that active on it before, so we didn't realize when you were gone.
Exactly. He's on Instagram. That's what the kids are on.
Yeah, we've actually been trying to keep up with those new social media platforms. We just got on TikTok, and as adult males, I'm embarrassed for myself that we have to go to that level, but it's weird because as a podcast, you want to get yourself out there as broadly as possible. But
sure, I mean, you're on a watch list now.
I know. I was going to say, I feel like it's like Working Fans Podcast / Jerry Lawler. Watch out for these accounts.
I hope Lawler's on TikTok.
I know, but it's going to be sadder when he calls for puppies there because he just doesn't want them to be old enough to be dogs.
I love the fact that when they were in Memphis a few weeks ago, they had to do the bit on Raw where a female fan was so excited to see Jerry Lawler in the back.
Right.
If you want to know how much clout Lawler still has in 2021, that's all you need to know. Nobody's allowed to be over in WWE except for Jerry the King Lawler.
Yeah, he's the only one that gets it nice in his hometown, except when they're supposed to come out to vote for him.
Well, that problem with that is that not everybody in Memphis is a wrestling fan. There's a few people who have cracked a book. And when you look into Lawler's history, it's not great.
No, especially the stuff he shares. Forget what comes out of his mouth. Just look at sometimes what he shares on Instagram, and it almost gives you a deeper insight into the inner creepiness.
Well, there's also the problem of when you run in a city like Memphis, chances are Lawler has slept with your wife or daughter. So you're not going to want to go support that guy.
Oh, 100%. Now, were you always a wrestling fan, or what kind of brought you into it?
I was always a wrestling fan. I got brought in as a little kid, the Hogan era, the rock and wrestling, the cartoon on Saturday mornings. I was a comic book guy, and it was to see these guys come to life. It was mind blowing. It was, an era before there were Marvel movies or any of that stuff. and you see someone like Hulk Hogan or Randy Savage, and they're so much larger than life that it's like watching a cartoon that come to existence. And when you think that it's real and you're living and dying by everything that's happening when you're a kid, it's the best. And they get your hooks in you, and then you want the toys and you want the lunchbox and you want the pajamas and the Halloween costume, and you're stuck for the rest of your life. It's a really smart marketing strategy.
Yeah, that's why WWE is almost the ultimate abusive relationship, because it's like they had your trust once upon a time, and every once in a while it's almost like they give you enough to really want to buy back in, and then they do some goofy shit where you're like, why do I watch this? And then it's like Kevin Owens resigned, so you're like, I'm back in. And then he's going to be like Bobby Lashley's manservant in like 2 months.
But that's the beauty of being a wrestling fan. It's like we all suffer together. And depending on how long you've been a wrestling fan, you've suffered for years or decades. I always find the hallmark of it, it's like liking an indie band is the best way I can describe it, where, I liked them first, when none of my friends were wrestling fans growing up, and then the NWO hit and Stone Cold hit and DX hit and everyone is wearing the shirts at school. I'm like, where were you guys when it was Crush and Savio Vega? Like, how dare you?
We had to pretend like Doink was all right when he brought along Dink, and then the 3 other midgets were like, no, this is great.
Exactly. We suffered through the post Hogan on steroids WWF when he had spaghetti arms and a Japanese photographer camera blew up in his face, and slogged through years of watching, Mania with Todd Pettengill, where you were excited to see Aldo Montoya because, damn it, that was a star. He had pyro that spun.
1,000%. Robert, I'm curious, because I kind of grew up in that golden era too, a little bit, with the Hogan era first in the 80s. And I remember thinking too in the 90s too, like, okay, people are starting to quote this shit again. Like, this is interesting. But I remember like the first time I started on WWF, but I found like AWA and then Tim Crockett and stuff. What was some of the other promotions you discovered, and was your mind kind of blown? Like, hey, there's other wrestling promotions out here?
Oh, that always confused me because I knew there was WWF. It was kind of like synonymous. It's like if you get a cut, you get a Band-Aid, you don't get a bandage. If you're going to watch wrestling, you're not watching wrestling, you're watching WWF. Growing up, I was born up in New York, so that was WWF territory. And I moved down to Florida, and you got WCW, which aired at like 6 o'clock in the morning on a local station. And it was mind blowing because you kind of recognize some of these guys that used to be in WWF. And then you saw some of these other talents. Like I remember seeing Cactus Jack for the first time and him fighting Van Hammer on a dude ranch. And I'm like, what is this? How is this real? And then I consumed anything that there was. I used to love on ESPN. First, you had a little bit of AWA. And then when that transitioned and it was global, and global they treated it like it was something that was real. And I thought it was a real major promotion until I found out, they're essentially wrestling in a barn in the middle of Texas. And I would see all these guys, and then they would transition to WWF and WCW. And I'm like, hey, there's the Lightning Kid and the Handsome Stranger instead of the 1, 2, 3 Kid and Buff Bagwell. It was strange to realize what else there was. And then I think if you were a fan in the early 80s, you aged perfectly with wrestling because it was right around the early 90s when ECW was accessible. And when it felt like WWF wasn't necessarily catering to you, you had an alternative to keep you hooked. And it felt decidedly different. It felt exciting. And it felt like, is this something I should be watching? It's airing at like 1 o'clock in the morning. And sometimes it's on and sometimes it's not. And it's a wide internet, everyone had, Miracle Online or Prodigy or something where it was dial up, but to get some of this content and be able to watch it, you had things that scratched various itches of your fandom. I was always going to be loyal to WWF, but it was cool to see what else there was out there.
Did somebody get you into wrestling? Like for me, it was my brother. He fell out of it. I never did. My mom would occasionally watch it. Like, my dad was kind of in and out, but like, was there anybody that got you really into it too?
No, this was one of those things I think my parents really hoped I was going to outgrow. It was like, you sure you don't want to try cigarettes instead? Like something a little less. And my friends weren't into it. Like I had like a lot of people, you had 2 groups of friends. You had your normal friends, And then anybody you were happy that knew what wrestling was, no matter how much of a social miscreant they seemed like.
Oh, God.
And so my parents knew I had my group of friends that were regular friends, and then the people who liked wrestling, so I could feel like I have somebody to talk to about this with. And younger fans don't understand or appreciate that. Like I've talked about this with Scott Chaplin, who I know you guys had on here. You know, he's in his early 20s. He grew up with, there was always the internet. You could always go online and realize millions and millions of people watch wrestling. I grew up in an era where nobody I knew was a wrestling fan. Nobody watched it. Nobody was into it. So it felt like this is my little thing that I'm going to enjoy. And it's not something I can really necessarily share with anybody.
Yeah, like when we were younger, we were convinced there were two Ultimate Warriors, both with the same oddly racist viewpoint.
It was two different warriors because you could tell because the tan was different.
Yeah,
You could convince yourself like, no, he looks slightly different. It's just it was a different cycle that Hellwig was on. But it was that, or that guy's getting a push because his legs are tanner than they used to be.
yeah. Now, going back to talking about suffering, I want to get a quick plug in for you guys because it's the Christmas season. And much like Jesus, you and Dan suffer each week after watching Raw, and you do something to sports entertainment with on your Patreon. So if you don't want to suffer through Raw, but you want to laugh about what happened, Dan and Robert are there for you every week.
I mean, that's kind of where the Twitter account came from. When I started WWE Creative, it was literally, I had left WWE and was in law school. Nobody I knew was watching wrestling, and my wife sure as hell didn't want to hear about, anything that happened. She could smile for a moment, but I'm like, you won't believe what Sheamus did, and you can watch her soul leave her body. And I just started tweeting the same kind of stuff I would say if I was sitting in the writer's room, and it caught on, and it became a chance to have a little bit of a conversation with the very scary world that seemed like Twitter. And people were very receptive, and it was nice. And for a lot of people, they felt like, hey, I'm watching Raw alone. You're watching Raw alone. We're all kind of watching it together and having that experience. Over the last few years, I feel like I'm shouting into an empty canyon because more and more people are jumping off of the WWE bandwagon. They're not watching it live. It's not compelling weekly television, which absolutely kills me. And within the confines of Wrestle Roasts, our two other co-hosts, Mike Lawrence and Scott Chaplin, they don't want to watch current WWE product. I can't blame them. And even when we do our Patreon shows, those aren't necessarily going to be about Raw. So we added an additional tier of, all right, for those real diehards who want to either hear our thoughts on Raw or don't want to watch it themselves and want to get somebody else's take on it, it works. And I'm able to record it right after Raw is over and then just purge it from my mind.
It's one of my favorite Patreons because not only do you get the regular roast every week, but you'll get bonus roast and extra content each week. And just being a podcaster, I admire that somebody else can get paid for it because a lot of podcasts, we're almost doing this on spec, hoping that eventually the money will come in. Like, it's not everybody's end goal, but to see you guys actually making money from it is heartwarming because you guys do good work and it's almost like your art.
Well, I needed to pay off my yacht somehow. So our 100, no, we do it for fun. I mean, the Patreon is a nice little added bonus to justify why I'm abandoning my wife and kids. But it's really a labor of love. And it's just the four of us enjoy wrestling, and the camaraderie of the show comes from kind of like what you guys have here, just listening to people who genuinely respect and appreciate pro wrestling. But it's not going to insult your intelligence to hear about it. It's being treated like a serious art form because, I hate to break it to other people, it is a serious art form. It's when I went for my interview with WWE, that's what I talked about. I said, this is, theater. This is, if you were in ancient Greece, this is what you would get. This is what Shakespeare was for the masses. You have, hero stories, you have villain stories, there's cheering, there's booing, there's emotion, there's morality to it. It's everything that you could possibly want. And in my humble opinion, it's better than real sports. And I've worked in real sports majority of my professional adult life. It's better than real sports because you're at least guaranteed to get something entertaining. I worked in pro boxing. I worked in professional hockey. you were not guaranteed any sort of legitimate entertainment when you were there based on what the product was on the ice or in the ring. It's why UFC drives me nuts, because a lot of UFC fights are not that great, and you're expected to pay money in order to watch it. WWE, no matter what it is, or AEW, or wherever, you're going to get 2 to 3 hours of television that's designed solely to entertain you. And while it may be predetermined, you don't necessarily know what's going to happen. There are people who spent a lot of hard-earned money to go see the Spider-Man movie in theaters, which I have not seen yet. We're not talking about it. I've avoided the internet. If somebody spoils this for me, I will have your family killed. I have the ability to do that. I still can track down Undertaker's phone number and make your life a living hell. He will talk to you about Blue Lives Matter for a number of hours. You don't know what's going to happen in a Marvel movie, yet people know it's not real, and they spend hundreds of millions of dollars on tickets for it. It's why the fake thing always made me laugh. It's like people love to feel that little bit of superiority, and you must think this is real, and I know it's fake. I'm like, no, dumbass. Once you're past the age of like 8 or 9, you realize if you punch somebody in the head 10 times in a row and he's not bleeding, this might not be on the level, but who cares? It's wildly entertaining, and it's a hell of a lot of fun, and it's some of the best entertainment you're going to get 52 weeks out of the year, because unions are stupid and wrestling health is not important.
100%. Now that's always been a tough thing to take. Like, it's great that the entertainment's always there, but you always don't consider what the performers go through. Now, you said a couple things earlier. You're a lawyer and you wrote for the WWE. Were you in law school while you were at WWE? Which came first?
No, I worked at WWE before I went to law school.
Okay. How do you go from being a fan to applying for the WWE? That seems like a wild process, especially if you're a fan.
The simple answer is you hide the fact that you're a fan. It was very much, I mean, the crass example I would always give is, I remember years of being in Hebrew school and reading like Diary of Anne Frank. It's like, that's what it felt like going into WWE. You had to conceal everything about your identity in order to get in there, and you were always worried you were going to be exposed and that your life was going to be in danger. They loved the fact that I had a background in television production. I had done work at the University of Florida, the greatest college on earth, for the Gator football team, the greatest football team on the planet. I saw one of your guys was wearing a Seminole sweatshirt in the video, so I just really want to.
Oh, AJ Strangebrew, yeah.
Not gonna tolerate that. Not gonna tolerate that nonsense. And I worked for Showtime Network when I was in college, so that was what gave me an air of credibility. So when I went in there and could say, I have familiarity with what you guys are doing, what I admire is the craft and the ability to tell stories versus, oh my God, Bret Hart, Mr. Perfect, 1991 SummerSlam is the reason why I became a legitimate wrestling fan. We'll never forget that moment. Never want to say any of that. So it becomes a little bit like wolf in sheep's clothing when you get in there and you have to tread lightly. They want somebody who knows everything that's ever happened in the WWE, knows all their superstars, appreciates everything that's ever occurred, but God forbid you were ever once a fan, or they will immediately drive you out. It's a very strange, self-loathing organization.
Interesting. Robert, first off, too, before I ask this question, Bret Hart Perfect kept me as a wrestling fan. So.
It changed my view. It's when I turned from being a Hogan fan to being a wrestling fan, to realizing this is an art form, and everything clicked into place. And I was like, Mr. Perfect's the most amazing guy ever. Bret Hart is also in there.
It's one of those few examples of work rate that the WWE ever showed. It's almost like Savage Steamboat, Hart Flair, or Hart Perfect, and then like kind of almost few and far between.
That intercontinental time period, you had guys like Bret Perfect, Bulldog, Michaels. Everybody was starting to really click. I just wanted to ask you, though, because obviously, so you were a writer, and, we don't always hear a lot about this stuff, and I'm just curious, who were some of the guys that were actually really good to work with in the sense that they could actually maybe throw ideas back at you, and they were good ideas, and you could maybe have a good back and forth with?
Edge is the guy that comes top of mind. I mean, that guy was, he was Money in the Bank winner at that point in time, and whenever it came time for pre-tapes, he always just had something. There was an idea, there was a take, there was a viewpoint on what he wanted to do. and he would nail it every time, no matter what it was. And this was around the time of his feud with Matt Hardy, when Matt Hardy had come back and all the unpleasantness with Lita. And I thought going into it, I'm going to be a Matt Hardy guy. I'm going to really want to help him out. You know, this thing with Edge and Lita was disgusting that they fired Matt over it. Lita was a beyond professional, incredibly nice, incredibly talented, incredibly smart woman. Edge was an absolute delight. Matt Hardy, and that's all I have to say. So he was great. John Cena was a guy who, no matter what it was, I mean, you give him something small and he's going to make it work. Very enthusiastic, very collaborative, zero ego, knew the name of every single person he was working with. He knew the lighting guys, he knew the camera guys, he knew about your families. Like, he was a pro's pro, and this is back in like 2005. He was just becoming the guy. And that was an absolute pleasure to do with. Batista, same way. Another person who, no matter what you want to talk about, was dealing with stuff with him and Eddie for their, hey, we're going to pretend to be friends. And he just got it right away. And he had the comedic chops that we didn't realize he was going to have. And you started to see what was really exciting about Batista, as opposed to just, he was the muscle for Evolution. And then it was the him and Hunter stuff. This was moving him to SmackDown. This was giving him his own identity. And no matter what it was, if it was serious, if it was comedic, he always delivered. And it was awesome.
You know, I'm just curious. One thing, listening to you talk about, like you mentioned Batista, you mentioned Cena, you mentioned Edge, generally the top guys in this time, and you mentioned professionalism with all of them. Would you say there's a correlation that your tippy top guys, a lot of times in that time period there, were some of the most professional as well?
I also worked with Randy Orton.
Okay. Okay, so it's not
in Orton's defense, I will give Orton he was a young guy who had the entire world handed to him. He went from the military brig for going AWOL to thinking his life was over, to you go into professional wrestling and everyone's like, you are the second coming of everybody. And it's going to give you a big head. And then when you're on the road and you're in your early 20s, in every town, there's women throwing themselves at you. And every legend that shows up wants to go and kiss the ring. You're going to develop an ego. It's going to happen. And unfortunately, when I worked with him, we had to bring in Cowboy Bob Orton to kind of temper him a little bit, to keep him, on the straight and narrow, not knowing, Cowboy Bob was full of Hep C and we were going to have him bleed all over the Undertaker. So, it didn't really work. Now, ironically enough, years later, Randy and I become good friends. He's an awesome guy. And he even acknowledges,
right,
yeah, I wasn't the greatest dude to work with at that point in time. But there are certain people that are going to get 100 chances. There are certain people who are going to get one chance and it's one and done. It helps if you're really talented that you're going to get a number of opportunities. And if you're talented and have the right people backing you. There were plenty of guys I loved that I wanted to do stuff with that if we even broached their name, it was going to be bad. I thought the world of Brian Kendrick. I wanted to do a ton of stuff with Kendrick. I thought he was awesome, and basically got told, like, just, it's not worth, you're going to push a boulder up a hill and it's not going to go anywhere, and it's not going to help your career. And I would watch the OVW tapes that we were getting from developmental and see CM Punk when he was first there. And I'm like, how are we not using this guy? Like, how is he not our top guy from day one? And they're like, nope, Paul Heyman's pushing him really hard in OVW. You don't want to get that stink on you. And that was how I kind of hooked up with Mr. Kennedy and started to do some work with him when he first was debuting, because I'm like, that's my kind of wrestling talent. My one contribution to the professional wrestling was the Kennedy microphone dropping from the ceiling. Was giving that pitch and then green lighting it and then it taking off. And it was like, that's really cool that I was able to do that one little tiny thing to contribute to the business. Because when you're on the writing staff, it's a bit of a misnomer. You're not writing everything week in and week out the way you hope. It's, you have an audience of one, and he's a crazy old man who sometimes loses his egg. And you need to do everything possible to hold his attention, or else he's going to wander into traffic.
That was actually going to be my next question, because I think the biggest question, knowing you worked for WWE, is we got to ask about Vince. I kind of have a two-part question. what was it like your first time meeting him? And then what is it like in general to work underneath him? Because I think with what's happened with the product the last few years, we all look at it as he's just gotten crazier and less reeled in. But there's got to be a real human behind that maniac, right?
There might be a real human, but he's in the other room controlling the devices that move Vince. Vince is Vince McMahon 24/7. There is no point in time where he kind of leans over to you and be like, you know, it's all an act, right? You never have that. There's always a presence. He's very professional. He's very businesslike. You go into those meetings whenever the meeting is going to start. I know if anybody listens to Pritchard's podcast, he's always talking about like late night meetings and all this other craziness. It's kind of the way your life is. You're on call for someone who Vince McMahon is a genius. There is no question. There is no doubt in my mind. Vince McMahon is a genius. When you are running a company the way that he is running it, and you go from a meeting about trucking logistics to a meeting about merchandising, to a meeting about TV rights deals, to a meeting about international syndication, and then going into a creative meeting, it's a very long day for this dude. And he doesn't like to sleep, and he doesn't like to admit that he needs to pass something off. So you get a limited window of time with him, and you need to impress him. And you need to hope that he's in a good enough mood where he's going to focus on what you're saying. And the best tool with that was Stephanie. We would have to pitch everything to Stephanie, and Hunter, who was injured at the time, was kind of in the office learning everything. So we would pitch, go through all of Raw, all of SmackDown with Stephanie, and she would give us her notes so that when it got presented to Vince, she could be the McMahon whisperer and talk to Vince and be like, no, this is a good idea. And here's why we like this. And, oh, okay, I understand. And every once in a while, the juices would start to flow with Vince, and you would see it. And I remember once there was a meeting where I saw that spark, and I saw who that guy was, where he suddenly mapped out 2 years worth of storylines out of nowhere. And it was awe-inspiring, and it was the most amazing thing ever. And then it all fizzled because, he forgot about it the next week. But it was really cool to see in that moment where we try to come up with coherent long-term storylines, but from the number of revisions that you go through from when SmackDown was taped on Tuesdays, and now I think it's back in that world, but now it's live. But when SmackDown was taped on Tuesdays, you would start your work week on a Wednesday. You start formulating the show for that week. You get a draft ready by Thursday. You present it to Stephanie Thursday. You get her feedback. Friday, you meet with Vince. You go over the show. Saturday, you do a conference call with Vince where you go over the show again from scratch as if he's never heard it before. Mm-hmm. And his notes on Saturday are as if he's never seen this show before ever. And forget your meeting on Friday.
Who is Austin Theory?
Exactly. God damn, he looks like he's missing a chromosome. And that's where Von Wagner came from. I'm kidding. Von Wagner's the next John Cena. He's going to be a big star. You go over the show Saturday, then Sunday you're on the plane, and you go over the show again.
Oh man!
And then on Monday you get to the building, you go over the show in the agent meeting. So then you have all the old timers that are sitting there, and at the time it was Arn, and it was Malenko, and it was Patterson, and DiBiase, and Michael P.S. Hayes, and Steamboat, and Steve Kern. So they're hearing Raw for the first time because not a single one of them opened the emails we sent them with the script. And that's the very first time that they're going to come up with their own suggestions. And Vince is going to listen to Pat Patterson over a writer. And Pat doesn't know we've mapped out 4 weeks of TV. He's just seeing this very narrow window. And we're like, okay, we're doing this. What if we do the other thing? Vince, I love it. We're like, well, Vince, if you do that, you've just undone the next 6 weeks of storytelling. No, we're doing it. Great. You rewrite the show again, and then before you know it, you got to start filming pre-tapes, and then the show's on the air. And the saying was, it's not on the air because it's good. It's on the air because it's 9 o'clock.
Wow. And that's got to really burn you out because you've talked about the same show for 4 days, 5 days. It gets changed at the last moment. And then you have to retool everything you planned to that. And then I imagine you just have to do that each week. And that really makes sense how you lose some of the continuity of these storylines.
And you lose credibility because you've talked to a wrestler and you're like, here's the trajectory of where we're going with you. we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And then the famous expression is, plans change, pal. They think that you're going one way, and then the rug gets pulled out from under them because who knows what. Vince doesn't like the punch that you threw during one of the matches and has now lost all faith in you. Or he didn't like the lighting in the pre-tape, so he cut the pre-tape, and the pre-tape told the story of why this match was happening, and it was setting up your big turn. Like, stupid little things like that. Cade and Murdoch won the tag titles, or were supposed to win the tag titles, but they were taking pictures with the belts for the magazine backstage, and somebody saw it, and it went up online, and then it became, well, you can't put the titles on them. Because it got on the internet that there was pictures of them taking with the championships. They had to change the entire show at that moment. It's wild, and it's the best learning experience you can have. It's tackle football on concrete.
Now, do you think that's the reason that a lot of guys leave the WWE feeling that they were promised something when maybe it's just a message that got mixed up? Because you hear a lot of guys say, oh, they were going to put the title on me. I was going to have this run.
That's just Ryback. He's been hitting the head a lot.
I was going to say some guys have less credibility.
Honestly, you're not ever. I've never once seen somebody guaranteed something. I've never seen somebody once told this is 100% going to happen. Everything is with an asterisk, and here's what we're hoping is going to happen, or here's a direction that we think this is going to go, and then things get altered. And part of what the challenge is for WWE, and part of why it is so stale and so static and so boring compared to AEW, and I'm the WWE apologist, and I know that, but I view it a different way. They are a publicly traded company. They have to answer to shareholders. They can't do anything that's going to rock the boat, because if you rock the boat, you run the risk of being removed by your board of directors, and who knows what's going to happen with the company. You have a different fiduciary duty. Tony Khan, bless his heart, is an incredibly rich billionaire who's playing with action figures on TV. He doesn't have anybody to answer to but himself, which is why he can put on the product that he puts on. It is, as a fan, here's what I want to see, and I'm going to put this on here, and it's going to be awesome. And if you gave any writer that roster, they're going to deliver a great show, assuming you don't have a bottom line. He's a private financial backer. He doesn't need to worry about Wall Street. WWE needs to worry about who's the next guy, who's the next marketing wing, and move on from there. They are a global enterprise that has a recording, a record label. They have a movie studio. They have TV production. They have streaming rights, and they have $2 billion deals that are in place right now. And that's all that really matters to them and to their shareholders. And as long as you're selling action figures and blankets and toys, they don't need to rock the boat. And they're going to continue doing what they do for as cheap as humanly possible, because that's what Wall Street wants from them. And the only reason Vince has ever deviated from what he did was because he was on the brink of going out of business and had to change his business model. And once he changed it back after the XFL folded in 2001 and he had complete control of the landscape, there was no reason for him to alter his business until Mattel came along and said, we don't want a TV-14 product. We're going to offer you more money than you can possibly imagine for your toy rights, but you need to make a PG show. And they're like, great, we're a PG show. Vince is a businessman. That's what it ultimately comes down to. It's somewhat creatively bereft to a lot of people, but still pulls in millions of viewers in 160 plus countries, and it's serving the master that it needs to serve.
I think Eric Bischoff made some of those same points too. Like,
fuck Bischoff.
I think it's really interesting. As a fan, to hear that. It's a very interesting perspective, though. Like, I don't think we think enough about what it means to be a publicly traded company.
We're also the nerdy fans that are interested in the backstage of it and the why of certain things.
And that was what kept me interested. Like, they lean into the dirt sheet world because they know after a certain point in time, certain fans transition from solely watching what's on TV to, we're going to go online and we want to know everything about everything. And they cater to that market. When I was in WWE 24/7, when I left the road and was transitioning to be a producer for that, before I I always knew I was leaving for law school. I knew I had an end date at WWE. So when I was able to move to not be on the road and do stuff for WWE 24/7, I started creating fan content that I wanted to see because I knew, more importantly, the cable system in Connecticut didn't offer 24/7, which means Vince had no way of seeing it. So we were completely scot-free, and I had the entire WWE library at my disposal.
That's got to
So
be the most fun as a fan.
we created the Legends of Wrestling Roundtable,
Yes.
where we literally just sat the guys around and we got them drunk. And it was the most fun. The first one was the most fun night. One of my most fun nights ever. It was Jim Ross as the host with Michael P.S. Hayes, Dusty Rhodes, Pat Patterson, and Mike Graham. One of these things is not like the others.
Yeah.
But we had just bought the Florida library, so we had to use Mike Graham.
Mhm.
And we gave them all coffee cups filled with booze. And my favorite part of all of this is in between one of the episodes that we were taping. We taped like 5 in a row. One of the PAs went to go refill Pat Patterson's cup, and he's like, "Yeah, give me some more coffee." And the guy brought him back, goes, "What the hell is this? It's coffee!" And got so pissed. I'm like, "You have to kayfabe it," because Kevin Dunn was there for some reason. Shane McMahon showed up just to watch them tape it. And as the episodes got a little later into the night, the stories became less and less usable. So it's like we're doing the Piper story, and Michael P.S. Hayes is starting to tell stories about like drunk Piper stealing the ring truck and building the ring in the middle of the motel, or Iron Sheik with a bag of cocaine in the backseat of a car. I'm like, this is awesome. We're never going to be able to use this, but this is so much fun to be able to have on film somewhere.
Yeah, I remember one of the great lines from that for me. I still remember this was like Dusty Rhodes. I think he was talking about Terry Funk trying to set him on fire and blah, blah. And he says, "This was like last week," and they're like in their 60s. And stuff.
That was the weirdest thing when I met Dusty, and he was talking about, he's like, "Oh, you're from South Florida. I'm going to be in David in a couple of weeks. I'm going to be wrestling." And I'm like, "You're still wrestling?" Like, it blew my mind. I love the American Dream. He was so much fun to work with sometimes, and sometimes would come up with ideas where you're just like, "Oh, you like, bless your heart, no." We were doing the Eddie Batista thing, and he's like, "What if you got Batista on the side of the road walking, and Eddie comes by in a lowrider with some thugs, and they open fire on him?"
We making movies here, baby.
Yes,
Assassinations.
he thinks we're making movies, and you know, not that kind of movie. We're not making Grand Theft Auto Vice City or something, but you know, you roll with it, and you just kind of nod your head politely when it's, you know, the American Dream or the $1 Million Man, guys you grew up loving who are pitching really terrible ideas.
Now, besides working in WWE, you worked on the MLW revamp for a while. Can you tell us about your time in MLW? Because I was a fan of MLW, like I told you off air, from when it was behind a paywall, an actual podcast network, to them making it was one shot, then it was Never Say Die.
Never
then it
Say
was
Never.
like, what, one or two more before they got their TV deal.
So yeah, so MLW was a promotion back in the early 2000s. It was one of those companies that tried to fill the ECW void, and it was started by Court Bauer, who shut down MLW to go join the WWE writing team. And I worked with Court on SmackDown along with Alex Greenfield, and we were all under head writer Dave Lagana. And Court, Alex, and I all got along really, really well, and Dave Lagana was also there. And we talked about what we wanted wrestling to be. And the old MLW was awesome because it had Joey Styles on commentary, and he was using a lot of the talent that had left ECW or were up and coming talent that hadn't been seen before. And Court started the MLW radio network, and it was the first home of Pritchard's podcast, and it was the first home of a lot of other wrestling shows. Cornette had a show on there. Court had a show. I had a show behind a paywall, which was a hell of a lot of fun to do. And we used to do an event called Wale Mania with the rapper Wale. And it was WrestleMania weekend, and it would be this big hip hop concert, and all the wrestlers would come hiding in the back so they wouldn't get seen. And it was a blast. And we were talking at one of them, and they're like, "I want to do this one shot. I want to do a one-off wrestling show. We think it'd be a hell of a lot of fun." And Alex and I are like, "Yeah, let's do it." And as we were getting closer, Court's like, "What if we try to bring this thing back full force?" I'm like, absolutely. Let's see what we can do. And we got Tony Schiavone out of wrestling retirement, and he came in as our commentator, and we started amassing this roster of young talent who were extraordinary. And a lot of them had never worked TV before, let alone you're working for 3 WWE writers. Our head camera guy was the head camera guy for ECW. Our TV director directed World Class and Ring of Honor. It was and our I don't know what his role even was. We had Nelson Swegler, who was the Kevin Dunn before Kevin Dunn. He was 250 years old, and he was great, but he knew all the logistics. Raphael Morphy was booking all of our buildings, who now books AEW. Our production crew and our ring crew are now the ring crew for AEW, and most of our rosters in AEW, and our commentators in AEW. You noticing a pattern by any chance? It was doing wrestling in a way that was pure and fun, where we could just, as kids in a candy store, come up with ideas for these wrestlers who nobody's ever seen before and help them mold and shape their characters. And they pulled me aside and like, Robert, there's a kid we want you to work with. It's his first time doing TV. His name is MJF, and I think you two are going to get along. And Max became my project, and it was the most fun thing I've ever done in professional wrestling, is work with MJF. And every month it was him and I coming up with vignettes and promos and pre-tapes and shaping what this character was going to be, and seeing him now become the greatest thing on television.
One thing I got to say about MJF, recently, just not even in the last few years, I saw him at an independent show a couple of years ago too, at Beyond Wrestling, and he pie-faced this kid. Like, he was laying on the mat, so it wasn't even part of the match. The kid was like, it's like a Halloween night. He's wearing the parka suit. He's being super obnoxious. I giggled my ass off, by the way, because I couldn't believe that. But I saw that, and then later in Dallas, when they were doing when the Von Erichs had come back, and he started talking about doing the Von Erich thing and all this, I really realized this guy's like fearless. Like, when I think of a comedian, like he's gonna go all out, and he's gonna push that envelope. And I don't know, like, behind the scenes,
telling Brian Pillman his mother should have swallowed him, calling her Methany. He's like on that cutting edge of where you need to be.
He was, and he is fearless. One of the things I did with him was our second or third taping. I grabbed a camera guy, and we went around Orlando, where we filmed most of these shows, and we just went to a bunch of different venues. And I just let Max loose. We went to a mall, and there was a store that legitimately was going out of business. And I'm like, Max, stand in front of that store, and I want you belly laughing as hard as you can. And he's bowled over laughing, and there's employees in the store looking who are about to lose their jobs, and he's just pointing and laughing at these people. It was just absolute gold. He got it. He got the character. He got exactly what to do. In real life, he's... I don't want to ruin the mystique. He's an asshole. He's an asshole.
I remember the first time I saw him at a wrestling show, I was kind of like, I saw him come out, and I was just kind of dicking on my phone. And then I look up, and he's just looking at me. And I reacted, and he was just like, fuck you. And I wasn't even paying attention. And then I'm like, who the fuck is this guy? Like, why am I getting roasted? And I didn't get it till I saw him a few more times. And I'm like, oh, this kid is a genius.
At MLW shows, I was always in the booth on the floor doing music and video cues. And his promos, he would change lines just to pop me. And that was his barometer. He would look over, because he used to know that on SNL, when they would do Stefan, John Mulaney, who would write Stefan, would always change out some of the jokes just to screw with Bill Hader. So Max and I would work out the promo, and then he would just change something and then just look over to me, and I would die laughing. And that was part of the fun of it. We worked on a promo against when he was working against Teddy Hart, and he took that same promo and used it on Pillman on AEW Dynamite. Where he's talking to Brian Pillman in Hell was the same promo we did of him talking to Sue Hart in Hell. And I ran it by Court, and Court's like, check with Teddy and make sure Teddy Hart's okay with it. And I'm like, Teddy's not going to give a shit. And Teddy was like, no, say whatever you want, man. What did Stu ever do for me? And we're like, okay.
He's not the reason you're here at all, Teddy. Like, there's no connection.
No. Teddy Hart's there because I think he had pictures of Court with a donkey or something, because we kept using Teddy creeped me out. I couldn't deal with Teddy a lot of the time.
Yeah, Court definitely seemed to be. I mean, just as a fan, like he would work with the people. It seemed like that maybe nobody else wanted to work with.
Low key, Teddy Hart.
Yeah,
And that's the thing. He always says like, "I'm
Joey
the asshole."
Ryan.
He's like, "I'm the."
We won't get into
you
that.
had
That
me
was-
going until. So
Go to the
low-key-
Patreon for that.
Low
story.
key, no, that's right. Low key was because we brought in low key, we brought in MVP, who were two guys that were kryptonite. Nobody touched them, and they were the most professional, incredible, collaborative, giving individuals. And I had so much fun working with MVP and so much fun working with low key. And the problem with low key is low key expects a degree of excellence from people and doesn't tolerate anything else. And I'm going to treat this seriously and I'm going to give this my all. And if you're not, and I feel like you're not, I'm going to tell you. And sometimes in wrestling, people don't like that. And that was, the caval of it all. Like he could have showed up and cashed a check wearing a wetsuit for years. And he just got to the point of, I wasn't just going to be happy working Velocity or Main Event or whatever it was. And when you're vocal, sometimes it works in your favor, sometimes it doesn't. And then you get that reputation, unfortunately. Teddy Hart was kooky and off the wall and weird, but fans loved him. I didn't understand the Joey Ryan thing at all. I got that he had built a following, and this is before him being potentially canceled and all that. Let's put an asterisk in a star there. And I remember Wheeler Yuta showing me a video of this guy, and he's like, "This is a dude I want to bring in," and it was Orange Cassidy.
Oh,
and I'm watching this video of him, and I'm like, "This is the weirdest stuff I've ever seen." But we're like, "Well, no, we have Joey Ryan. You can't do two guys who are being meta," and we bet on the wrong horse.
And it's funny because like we have enough to explain as wrestling fans, and then we go, "There's this guy with a dick grab spot. Like I'm not a fan of it. People love it. I don't love it." And then it's like, it's hard to come back from there. But Robert, we don't want to be difficult to work with like Teddy Hart. We have to have you on again because we want to talk the Wrestle Roast podcast. We want to talk so much more. But on our show here, we do a segment called the 5-3-1, where we take your top 5 list on a particular subject, vote it down to a top 3, debate it down to a top 1. And since we're closing out 2021, can you give us your top 5 wrestling moments of the year?
Yeah. So some of these won't be much of a surprise whatsoever. And as the WWE guy, it surprised me that it was more AEW heavy, but it's the way it is. I think the first moment has to be the debut of CM Punk in AEW. I think there was very few moments that existed in wrestling that were going to replicate the authenticity of what that was. That was something as a fan, you wanted the moment that he vanished from that Royal Rumble. You were desperate to see CM Punk back. And it was a genuinely emotional moment. And this is even with the fact that having dealt with the real CM Punk, I know that he's definitely a difficult guy and not the easiest person, but you forget all that. You became a fan, and it was a real moment that felt like you were a fan. Second for me was another Punk moment was him and MJF. Watching MJF's promo where Max eviscerated CM Punk, like as a proud parent, seeing this moment, I'm like, this is the coolest thing ever. I texted him back when it was him and Jericho, and I'm like, there's nothing cooler than seeing my creation go toe-to-toe with the dude that kept me involved in wrestling. And then just watching the masterclass Max put on with Punk, and has continued to do so. But that first thing that you knew they were going to eventually collide was amazing. My third memorable moment was Danielson Omega at Arthur Ashe Stadium. The match itself was good. The atmosphere, the environment, the crowd, especially after I watched Thunderdome for a year and a half straight. This was like ECW One Night Stand, where you just had goosebumps, and this audience was rabid and loved and appreciated everything. And it made you a wrestling fan, whether you wanted to be or not. My fourth moment, because this was so surreal and so weird to see and brought me so much perverse joy, was the WrestleMania rain delay. Because
that must have been burning Vince.
It was where you saw who could actually deliver on television.
Yes.
Who could you trust with a live, unscripted promo? how they were able to carry that broadcast in panic mode, that felt like the WWE of old. That was like, oh, there's still the magic there. There's still what they can do when it's not overproduced to a comma, Kevin Dunn world. It was, all right, we can trust Kevin Owens the microphone. Give Kevin Owens a microphone. Let him just cut a promo. That to me was one of the most fun, pure wrestling moments of the year. And then I think the number 5 most memorable moment was the WWE releases. Seeing the number of talent that got cut, seeing a guy like Braun Strowman suddenly unemployed, so many talented people. And I think as a former creative member, you can't help but think there is so much you could do with these people. And what I would love to get my hands on these guys. And the fact WWE dropped the ball with so many talented performers, and then dropped so many of them all at once, it was genuinely shocking. And unfortunately, it happened more than one time. I think one of the most talented wrestlers in the world is Isaiah Swerve Scott, who was our first MLW world champion, is Shane Strickland. Like that dude has every intangible you could possibly want from a professional wrestler. And for him to be such a star in NXT and called up to SmackDown because Fox thought he was really engaging and his group was amazing, and then they cut him, it was like, what are you guys doing? The same thought I had when they got rid of John Morrison, who now, after losing Jeff Hardy, they wish they can get John Morrison back.
100%. Now, Dave's happy that we're under time constraints, and I can't ask about what I perceive to be not racism in WWE, but a definite racist slant. But I'm going to give you my top 5. CM Punk's return in Chicago, obviously the electricity, that was a big moment. Bryan Danielson's heel turn has been masterful. I've loved watching the subtlety in it and how you see a different wrestler coming out of him now.
Because he really is a heel.
Yeah.
In real life, that dude is a heel. Like, and if in a good way, in a funny way, he's a heel. He's not the smiling, happy baby face. Like, he is a guy who gets it. And if you ever watch the Wrestling Road Diaries with him and Colt Cabana, and he was doing his farewell speech, he gets in the car after and he's like, all right, I'm going to do that same speech again tomorrow night. It seemed like a true, genuine, emotional moment. And you realize, oh, it's all BS and he's a showman and he gets exactly what he's doing. I love that.
Now, I've also got Big E winning the title because obviously I have a certain idea about what I think about WWE. And it was good to see them get a black champion. And so far, they haven't dropped the ball as far as I thought. Like when they had the Hurt Business, and then they just broke it up inexplicably. I'm like, how are you going to get the black 4 horsemen and not ride this to the moon?
Because you God damn it, you can't have Lashley have other people. It makes him look weak. He's a star. Who the hell is Shelton Benjamin? That guy can't cut a promo. And the other guy, I don't even know the other guy. Wears a sock on his head. I don't trust him.
Now, my 4th moment is FTR confronting the Briscoes. And I don't know how familiar you're going to be with moment 5 because this was just a funny moment, but GCW did an event called Emo Fight. And Nick Gage comes out at one point and he's doing his post-match speech and he's doing the, I love you motherfuckers. Now play My Chemical Romance. And it was just funny because I can't imagine that being anywhere on Nick Gage's playlist. Hey, what's that song? The Black Parade? I love that.
When I was a young
Nick Gage is
once again, listen to Wrestle Roast for their opinions.
We did a roast of Nick Gage, and you would hear exactly what I thought of Nick Gage for the better part of an hour. So that's why I'm just gonna give a very polite. I'm happy he is earning an income. Good on you. I'm not gonna besmirch somebody for that, but I like David Arquette. David Arquette's a buddy of mine. Please don't kill David Arquette. Like, he's a nice dude. He was a great WCW champion.
Now, Dave, do you want to give us a quick couple lists here at the end, and then we'll kind of come up with a winner?
All right. I will definitely do that.
We don't want to keep Robert too long. We're happy anytime we can get a guest. And actually, Dave's got to get to his girlfriend's nursing graduation today.
Oh, that's what I got it.
Yeah.
It's
He's
priorities.
also on no sleep. He runs a bread route. And like we were talking earlier about recording when you're exhausted, Dave messaged me earlier. He goes, "Hey man, I'm on no sleep." So I call him up and I'm like, "Define no sleep. If it's 0 sleep, I can handle the interview." And I was talking about it. He goes, "Nah, man, I'm actually kind of excited. Let's get this in."
Yeah, no, we did that. If you listen to the Wrestle roast that we dropped this week, the Charlotte Flair roast, because of scheduling, we had to record it after Dynamite. And usually we record on a Thursday at like 6 o'clock. That's perfect in my window. I have small kids that get up at 5 a.m. So I'm used to like no sleep. But having stayed up all day working, then watching Dynamite for 2 hours, then expecting to do 2 hours of the podcast, by the end of it, it was like my high spot was I want to go take a nap. So I totally get it. You're going to put on a happy face for the nursing graduation and throw rice or whatever you do with those things.
I don't know, but we'll wing it.
They throw stethoscopes in the air and it's great.
He's going to have to help wrangle those 5 kids. They're going to be running around wanting to catch the thing that they throw in the air.
We don't got all 5 of them, thank God. So, yeah, let me throw a couple lists here. Jake St. John, friend of the show. He's got Big E wins the world title. Will Ospreay winning the IWGP title. His win ranked higher than Big E because he thought the IWGP title means a little more.
Scott just passed out on his couch through amazement.
Scott didn't know that Big E's WWE champions here. Fine.
Brian Danielson, Adam Cole debut in AEW. Hangman Page wins the title. And again, I think a lot of people have this as number 1. CM Punk returns. Like you, I gotta agree. That is like one of the most authentic moments. That natural crowd reaction.
If you can get Cornette to say that he couldn't have done it better, then there's something to the moment.
I'm gonna give you a couple more real quick here. CM Punk returns. This is Zach St. John, his brother. CM Punk returns. All the other AEW debuts: Cole, Danielson, Black, Soho. Big E,
which shows you how this is why AEW kills me, because they as a student of the game that Tony Khan is, he doesn't realize that WCW flamed out because they just started relying solely on big surprise debuts, and there's only so many you can do. And on the Dynamite that aired on the week that we're recording this, which was The Winter Is Coming, the lights went out at the end of that show, and everybody in that crowd thought it was going to be Bray Wyatt.
Yeah,
and the lights came back on, and it was Sting and Darby Allin. And you heard the audience kind of go,
right?
Because they're just conditioned that all you respond to now is surprise debut, surprise debut, surprise debut, and it loses its cachet. Sorry.
100,000%, though. I do want to agree with that because I am a big fan. I've been watching for years, and I was expecting Bray Wyatt to be there as well. And
it's not a surprise debut anymore when you expect it.
Well, but then when you also don't get it, you're kind of like, oh, and it's like it wasn't a bad angle.
It wasn't a bad angle, but there's no way Wyndham was going to make it down to the ring in that short a window of time and get in there without huffing and puffing. Bless his heart.
But also, you've conditioned me to expect more now, and So Zach also has Big E winning the world title.
Wow, surprised how many people picked Big E winning the title.
You know what? I have it on my too. AEW Forbidden Door, opening Forbidden Doors. He says, and Hangman beats Omega. I'm going to read this one real quick. Scott. From Valentine, he had a little humor in his. Cody Rhodes ended racism.
Yes, yes, he did.
Nick Gage's Bloody Pizza Cutter appeared alongside a Domino's Pizza and national television commercial.
That was an all-time moment.
Perfect brand synergy, but nobody bought in.
Sabata returned and wrestled in an exhibition match, and exhibition matches usually involve a total of 0 headbutts. So good for Sabata. NXT became NXT 2.0, so now I have free time on Tuesday nights.
NXT 2.0 is great. You people don't know what you're talking about. It is fantastic. I'll say this, I know you have to run because I don't want to cost you your relationship, but NXT 1.0 was a complete and total failure because it was the best indie wrestling promotion in the world, and all Vince wanted NXT to be was to get him 1 WrestleMania main eventer. And it got him 0 WrestleMania main eventers in 6 years. Triple H was giving the audience what they wanted and not Vince what he wanted. And NXT 2.0 is going to be a success because Braun Breaker is eventually going to main event WrestleMania and Vince is going to feel vindicated. So NXT 2.0 is a hell of a lot of fun watching. It's like old school Memphis wrestling where every segment is just a random gimmick, a random angle, and the storylines make sense, even if they're written in crayon and incredibly simplistic. Sorry.
I do like the promo videos that they play. It almost feels to me like old WWE with Josh Briggs and his friend being.
When they're like we're Southern boys and we're going to throw, the hacky sack in the back, and then we're going to go to a concert and people are going to watch me like, I go to concerts. I like these guys. Like, that's the kind of shit that worked for so long in pro wrestling that it like the old WWF Superstars fan in me is so happy to see this nonsense.
I'm going to agree with some of that because as a fan, it does remind me of that old school a little bit where WWF, it even kind of reminded me almost of like, like Impact Wrestling Met Global or WCW Worldwide, like the taping style. And like I would say a small time independent in the sense you're going to see some people like, this is crap. It's like, oh, wait, this guy's really good. He could be a star. It's going to be, you kind of can't go in thinking the whole show is going to be like amazing. But
no, it's hit and miss. But you know what? Unlike AEW, I can tell you who every single wrestler is on NXT. Not their names, but I can tell you what their character is. I know Mike Lawrence always brings this up because he has no idea what Angelico is, and it bothers him to no end. But there's a number of guys in NXT or in AEW who are just, it's a wrestler. I couldn't tell you 3 things about them. Yet I watched, NXT, and I'm like, there's a dude with wacky jackets. And I know everything about him because he's got wacky jackets, and that's all you need to know to and understand this guy. There's another dude who's just like, they shaved my head and now I'm bald. That's his character. Sometimes wrestling is not that complicated.
He's also a hell of a card player, apparently. Well, actually, he's not that good at card playing. I think that's why he got.
He's not. He lost to Cameron Grimes to the moon, who I tried to bring in MLW, and Cameron Grimes was out of town the day that I needed him. And I was so pissed because I'm like, we got to bring this dude in. And I'm like, are you available tonight? He's like, I just left for the Carolinas. I'm like, damn it.
Yeah, he is good. We've been liking Cameron Grimes for a long time.
Oh, 100%. Awesome. Now, Dave, you want to bring us one more list? And we're going to skip the top 3 because I think the number 1 is going to be a little obvious.
Yeah. It's the WrestleMania rain delay. I know.
I got, I'll give you 2 more. I got Jesse from New Hampshire. He's got Cardona under a hood at GCW. Punk returns, the failed bomb explosion at AEW.
Thank you.
Adam Cole AEW debut and Dragunov beating Walter for the UK title. And I'm going to cram my list in because, hey, I'm a co-host on this show. And I'm
get your shit in, brother.
My shit in here. On the rain delay topic, I do have to say for me personally, Bianca Belair, Sasha Banks, they conveyed a lot of emotion in that match. I'm not saying I can watch every match or everybody's going to be crying, but that particular match, it came off, again, we'll use like the CM Punk thing, very authentic, very real in that moment. It just felt different in that card. So I got very into that match, and that's going to make my list, along with the Punk debut we already talked about. I will give it up to Hangman because I do feel that was the most compelling storyline AEW's had since the people got behind him. They got behind the Cowboys shit, and they pulled the trigger. Bryan Danielson, Omega, like you, I just felt like that was a moment. It was one of the fastest paced half-hour matches I've ever seen. It went by like I wanted more, which you should want in a match, I think. But just the atmosphere, it was so electric. And number 5, since I don't have my list in front of me, I'm just going to say off the top of my head, like you, MJF, Punk exchange. I thought MJF was owning him. I did love that Punk line. But, the better, a less famous Miz. I was like, okay, I didn't expect you to mention Miz. And maybe a little, but I like it. I like it because you guys are throwing daggers I wouldn't see coming. And I can't remember the last time a promo exchange that went that long kept my interest.
It was awesome.
100%. Now, Robert, before we let you go, is there anything you would like to plug on the way out?
You can follow me on Twitter at WWE_creative_ISH. Why _ISH? Because I used to be WWE_creative and got shut down by the WWE because people thought I was an authentic WWE account, which just goes to show you how bright some folks are. Wrestle Roast. We do a show. It comes out every Friday. It's myself, Mike Lawrence, Dan St. Germain, and Scott Chaplin. The 3 of them are incredibly talented professional comedians, and I am also there. We roast a wrestler. Starting in January, we're going to do every other week. We're going to do a roast, and then the other week, we're bringing back the 10 count, talking about top stories of the week. We also break down Dynamite every week. We talk about all kinds of other wacky nonsense. If you like this show, you're going to enjoy Wrestle Roast. It's a hell of a lot of fun. We have a Patreon. It is the best Patreon deal in wrestling. We do a bonus roast. We do a show every single week. They made me watch Jingle All the Way 2, which I have to talk about this weekend. So I'm going to start questioning my my belief in anything. And yeah, the Pro Wrestling Tees store. I've got some fun shirts on there, and this was awesome, guys. Thanks so much.
Hey, thanks for coming on, and we'd like to have you again. Have a good one.
Absolutely, Robert.